So, hello back, dear students. I hope you had a wonderful morning on and off campus. And as I said before, I am really looking forward to welcome Saskia Sassen in our studio. It wasn't easy getting her here because she's very busy, but it's such a privilege to have her speaking on future cities. So, I have Ursula Kirschner with me as well, and she's gonna introduce us to Professor Sassen.
Dear Saskia Sassen, it's a big honor to welcome you to the opening week at Farina University, Lüneburg. Let me say hello to the students who are watching this lecture online. We created for this opening week 4 hashtags. Today is marked by the hashtag diverse. And the many stations in your life confirm that you embody the concept of diversity. You were born in the Netherlands and grew up in Buenos Aires in Italy. You studied philosophy, political science, sociology and economics in Italy, France, Argentina and the US. You are now a Robert S. Lind Professor at Columbia University and Centennial Visiting Professor at the London School of Economics. Saskia Sassen is the author of 8 fundamental scientific books, a lot of well-known articles, and you can find many great lectures of her in the internet. She coined the term global city. Her authored books are translated in over 20 languages. She has received many international awards and honors. Back in 2013, as part of the Farina Digital School on the Ideal City of the 21st Century, your lectures inspired students here to think about global cities. The video have been viewed almost 19,000 times. For my research work was your definition of a frontier zone one key element. Now I start with a quotation from you. What I mean by frontier zones is a space where 2 actors from different worlds encounter each other. And further, but there are no established rules governing that encounter. That is a frontier zone. End of the quotation. In the same talk, you mentioned that the frontier zone are not on the edge of the city, but in the heart of a global city. In my role as an architect and urban researcher, I have been examining the topic frontier zone with an international team of students and researchers since 2015. In 3 international summer school sessions, we applied the medium film and attempted to show the zones at the audiovisual level. This morning show the students saw today examined some of the aspects from Sao Paulo. Saskia, you are not only known as an author on global cities, you are also a curator, helping to create specific urban development concepts, for example, at the International Building Exhibition IBA in Hamburg-Wilhelmsburg. You predicted that urban upgrading without displacement would come to Wilhelmsburg. This prognosis, part of an open letter crafted by various left-leaning initiatives in the city of Hamburg, was highly criticized and doubted. Since 2013, I have been living in one of the IBA houses and observed that the river island of Wilhelmsburg has changed positively in many regards. According to my perception, displacement or gentrification in the classical sense has not happened yet. So I want now to give up the floor to you. You will start with a 20-minute lecture and then we will open the discussion. And I warmly want to motivate the students, take your chance to ask and discuss.
Yes, yes. Well, do I speak now?
Yes, please.
Yes? Okay. Well, thank you for that most generous of introductions. And you have reminded me of so many things, especially the whole bit in Hamburg. That was quite an experience for me, I must say. That was wonderful that you brought that up. And the last time I was there was a few years ago. And I'm just hoping that everything is still working very well, but maybe not. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, very good. So
Maybe a
I
bisschen
want
lauter.
to use. Are we okay?
Yeah, we
So
can
I
hear.
want to use my short time to speak to get at an issue that is emergent, something that is emerging, for which we perhaps do not have a name yet, and so I am calling it frontier zones in our cities, including frontier zones in our old cities that have existed a long time. One example of what I capture under this notion of frontier zone is that people who do not necessarily want to live in a city find that the city is the only place where they can make a life, where they can own a little house or rent a little house. More and more land across our world is now captured by mining operations, by plantation growth, by buildings of all sorts, mostly for the rich. So our cities, which all cities that I know, have a lot of unequal types of conditions. Some do very well, others don't do very well. But for many cities, including those that do not do very well, having access to a city really makes a difference to their lives. So they know that they are on the poor end. They do not fool themselves, but they still feel that in the city, the anonymity itself that they can experience allows them to every now and then enter zones where in a more constrained situation they would not. There is still a sense of a bit of freedom in a city, in a big city, which you will not get in a suburb, which you will not get in a gated community, etc., etc. And the challenge really that we confront is, how do we protect those cities that are really open to the rich and to the poor, huh? And that want to make a good outcome, if you want. Um, Now, we know that cities have existed long before we had kings and queens. They have covered, some of our cities have covered extraordinarily long histories. Of course, everything has changed in those cities, and very few buildings of very old epochs still exist. But still, it is to be remembered that in a way, we humans grew up with some types of formations that we call cities. We call them cities now. But this notion of needing each other, this notion of a whole range of different forms of knowledge and capacities that makes possible the somewhat complex configuration that is a town, even a small town. So that mixity from very very, say, rich people to very poor people on different levels has existed for a very long time. And I find that extraordinarily interesting. Right now, what I'm very keen on understanding in the context of cities is this notion of the city itself as a frontier zone. In the past, we have tended to think of the frontier zone as something that is at the edges of our civilization. It's the edge. I want to understand to what extent, in today's world, where most people are in one or another version of cities, to what extent is the city itself certainly a complex city, a frontier zone, the frontier zones that we know of today. We don't have many of these traditional frontier zones, undiscovered terrain or uninhabited terrain. What we have is people all over the place, poor, rich, tribal things, urban formats, etc., etc. So what is the frontier today? We don't really have great clarity about this because we still think of the frontier as the edge of civilization, as there where something else has not happened yet that would have to happen if it becomes urban. But since we have destroyed so much, land and trees and all of this, and since we have so many big cities and small cities, the question really becomes, what is not subject to the urban condition? Are people who live in very isolated areas, they are the exception, they still exist, but there are fewer and fewer of them, and they're likely to lose their land. We see this in the Amazon. We saw the Amazon, in Brazil, and in part also in Ecuador and several. The Amazon region is huge. We thought that the Amazon would somehow remain a place where indigenous people could live their lives. We thought that 20, 30 years ago. Today we know that that is not on, that actors, powerful firms come into the Amazon and just break down whatever the livelihoods of the original inhabitants. So now Brazil and Latin America in general, Central America as well, are particularly brutal areas. I spent a lot of time there. It is quite extraordinary, the extent to which the world thinks that the most brutal zones are sort of in the Middle East. No, they are in the Americas, the North Americas, the Central Americas, and the South Americas. The extent to which land is being destroyed, the extent to which low-income people are getting expelled from their zones, the extent to which we have hunger and misery and desperate people trying to migrate, nothing compares with the Americas. And that is sort of a novel datum, I would say, because we still think that it's got to be worse in Africa, and it's got to be worse, in some other terrible parts of the world. Like China, many people think China actually is a much more reasonable proposition, believe it or not, than much of what I see happening in the United States or in Mexico and in other South American countries, including Brazil. So we have I think there is a task, I think of that for myself and for students, etc. There is a task that we need to address, and that is re-narrate certain parts of the world. And I would say that some parts of Central America, the northern parts of Latin America, certain conditions in the Middle East, certain conditions in Africa are really invitations for us to try to understand what kind of violence is an emergent form of violence that could be violence against Mother Nature, trees and healthy waters that get destroyed by mining, a lack of care, of protecting water flows. You know what I'm talking about, right? When we do mining, chances are we are poisoning the waters. And how do we manage to generate? And I think the new generations, the young people, are the ones that are most passionately involved with this, much more than my generation. But I am also passionately involved with this now. How do we protect the little that is left of the origins of our planet in terms of the green water quality and all of that? Because we really have managed to destroy quite a bit. Europe is extraordinarily protected in that sense, because you really have implemented a variety of rules and laws that aim at protecting the health of water bodies, the health of, of all kind of air quality, etc. And that is really, I think, very admirable. I think Europe, in that sense, is quite a special continent in many ways. Now, in terms of, I don't want to talk too long. I know that I can only talk 20 minutes, right? But I still have. Are you telling me that I have to end
No,
when I
please,
saw?
please go on.
Okay, not yet. All right, very good. Now, I want to focus a bit more on cities now again, and that is that, in principle, the city's a city. It is a bit open system. There are inequalities, etc. It seems to me that, given what is happening with the destruction of rural spaces, of virgin land trees, that the city really becomes a very important place that can serve as a guardian, ironically, of open green space. Most cities still have somewhere behind them green space. And it befalls to city governments and city residents and city activists to actually protect the non-urban. And this is sort of a new development, I would say. In the past, there were other actors that were protecting it, partly because small cities were more protected. They were small, they were not the subject of a big firm that wants to produce a huge building there with many houses and offices. But today, we need to actually help the areas that are not so urban to stay green, not to fall for it. And I mean, the United States, Brazil, those are countries where I have seen the most brutal destructions of beautiful green spaces, of water bodies because of mining, etc. And there again, Europe is much better. And it seems to me that right now, China, the leadership in China, has become extremely aware of the importance of keeping water clean, etc., so that they are also doing some rather interesting work to try to protect green spaces, water bodies, that should not be poisoned with chemicals and all of that. And I will say that the United States and Mexico are among the worst brutalizers, of all of these things, that a healthy city actually needs to be surrounded by good green spaces. Otherwise, it is not going to be healthy for very long. And so, and again, it's the young generations that are going to be the future heroes of these projects. My generation is still too engaged by, other modes of thinking. But then, in that sense, I really think that that's a very good function. Now, third and maybe final point, I know I don't have to speak very long here, is this notion that the city has become, for a growing number of middle-aged people, but also young people, the last place where they can actually put their bodies down on the street, on the sidewalk at night, because so much else in our cities is not enabling that. The big, huge buildings that we have been building, high-rise buildings, etc., they just capture a lot of urban space. And so where you before had a big park, now you have maybe a very little park and then some huge towers. Again, Europe is very special in this sense, because you don't like in Europe too many big towers. Whereas Manhattan is a jungle of huge towers. It's just extraordinary. And you see that certainly also in Latin America and in China, etc. So that the city, the guardian, think of the city as the guardian, not just of the urban condition, of the reasonable urban condition, but also of the green spaces that you need in a city and around a city. And these are, I think, projects that when I think of my students, the new generations are really into protecting green spaces, protecting clean waters. And that is to me extraordinarily reassuring. I really think that the young generation of students that we have nowadays in our universities, they are just it's a different passion that governs, a lot of what they're interested in and what they want to do. And it has very much to do with an awareness that we have destroyed too much. We have a lot of data now. I'm sure your students have that too. A lot of data to show how many species of trees, of birds, of animals, etc., of plants are gone. We still have a lot, but still. And so it is a very special moment for us elders who work with students to learn from the students. It's not just us teaching them. I think that some of my students know more about these kinds of particular issues, the vulnerabilities in our systems. They know more. They know little particular, forms of knowledge that they have, which are just wonderful, than your average professor, for God's sake. I'm not offending anybody here, I hope. But it is quite interesting to see how not all of them have, some just want to have big bikes and big cars, and that always exists. But so many students are not that way. They really are, and they tell their parents what not to do because it destroys, the green water. And so in that sense, question for me, and I will end with this, is, how do we know, we who live in these kinds of cities, etc., how do we know when a new epoch is emergent? So I dare to throw out at you as a bit of as an invitation to consider, but also as a provocation, the notion that we have actually entered a new epoch. Because of these younger generations, because there is a growing awareness of the environmental situation, etc., and that we really must enable this, that. And the young generations are our hope, because we, the elders, we're not going to be around that much longer, and we have acquired extraordinarily bad habits vis-a-vis Mother Nature. So it is really the young generations that are the promise, that are the hope. And we see in them very often, I see that in my students, I teach this one class, which is a huge class. And they are just so keen on taking what is happening, the way we do things, the way we shouldn't be doing, taking that very, very seriously. And that to me is beautiful. I'm going to stop talking just in case there is some little time for some questions, perhaps. And thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Sassen. It was an honor of hearing you talk here in our studio. And so now, as I hear, we have no student questions until now, but I'm saying again to our students, please come online, participate with us. This is a really rare chance to talk to Mrs. Sassen now and ask her some questions. She has a broad knowledge about everything with cities. So if there's anything you want to ask her about, please come into the Zoom room and we'll have you then. Before that, I can ask one question, because Mrs. Sassen, you started with how cities are frontier have frontier zones and are frontier zones where people can come without fitting their environment, their social environment exactly. So I was wondering. But how does that fit the fact that cities are very expensive to live in? Because if you wanna move into the city to gain that anonymity, to dive under socially maybe, then still the cities that we know are very expensive to live in.
Yeah, no, this is to me one of the big issues. That the prices it's just an abuse. We know that if you look at relative terms across different epochs, we know that it starts already a little, I already was writing about in the 1980s, but that's a long time ago, really. But now it's just exploded. And you see also more and more luxury buildings, which are designed to be expensive. So we are dealing with a situation that is not good right now in our major cities, certainly the cities that I know, in London, which is a beautiful city, and in New York. And there is an abuse on the part of the housing side. Now, the other thing that has happened that has intersected is that housing used to be in the hands of sort of, long-term families that handled housing and buildings, sort of many different families in a given city were doing the housing question. Well, now housing, it really, the high finance is an extraordinarily abstract form of knowledge. It's about algorithmic mathematics, but it is high finance who knows how to transform what we see as a building or as a house into something that is an asset-backed security. It's a financial instrument that they can buy, sell many times in a given day. That is catastrophic. That means that housing is no longer simply about housing. Housing is also a set of elements that you can buy, sell, and that's how you make your money. It's not about renting it out or buying and fixing as it used to be in the old days. Now, I think Europe has been much better about controlling this new grabbing that comes from high finance. But I know for a fact that in major cities in Europe, it is also happening. And and that is these are sad outcomes. And there is a growth. I mean, what we have is we always have had the super rich, super rich, 1%, 2%, 5%. But now we have another 25 or 30% in major cities who are having extraordinarily high incomes. They may not be super rich, but they are very rich. And that means that they can buy, you have one 25-year-old brilliant whatever financier who will buy a whole building where just he or she will be alone, and that means that you have a housing crisis. All our I don't know if all, but so many of our major cities have a housing crisis. And when you look at cities like San Francisco or New York City, there's a whole zone in each of these cities where you have people who are 50 years old, men and women, who used to have jobs, who used to be teachers, who are sleeping in little huts that they built at the edges, of an area in the city. And that's their livelihood. These are people who used to be teachers, who used to be, serving food in restaurants. I mean, modest operations, but still. So something is in deep decay, is one way of putting it, in at least particular aspects of this meeting of home and person. More and more people, including people, as I said, who used to have reasonable jobs, are now out. And I like to mention a fact. This comes from the West Coast, from California, where you have a large number of young, 25-year-old, 30-year-old men, mostly men, who have very good jobs. They make $150,000, etc. Dollars, a year. But guess what? That's not enough to have a house. They sleep in their cars. So they really have very good jobs and a lot of money, but $150,000 will not get you a home in the East Coast and not in New York either, or London.
Yeah, thank you, Mrs. Sassen, for that really basic but really sad and important thing to keep in mind about when we talk about cities. It's not all growing, it's not all getting better, but there are homing problems always in cities. And now we actually have a student's question.
Yes.
Very happy to be able to further a student on to you. Here we go. Hi, how are you? Hi, who are you?
Hi,
How are
I'm
you
Dennis.
Hi, Dennis, and how are you? No, but ask a question.
Yeah, I wanted to ask a question
Cool.
about the things you said to the Amazon rainforest. I have lived a year in Brazil a couple of years ago, and I've also been to the Amazon rainforest in a very beautiful trip. And just recently, I had a conversation with my host family, who is also from the south of Brazil, and they are very pro Bolsonaro. Yeah, I'm sure that you are familiar with the topic of what he is doing in Brazil right now. And we had a little political discussion because they are like a little bit more right wing from their perspective. And yeah, so my first question is, what can we do against like the right wing populism, like what he's doing right now, and also in terms of that he's not accepting that like that he's promoting the companies who take away all the space from the indigenous people. Yeah. And my other question would be what we as Europeans can do to help prevent the Amazon rainforest, or how can we politically be active?
Let me start by saying that I already mentioned it, that the Americas are particularly, the American continent, contain particularly, I don't know how to put it, it's a kind of willful ignorance, you know, that you think that, yes, we can do this, we can do this, we can do this, we can do this. I mean, maybe it's because, you know, that was a land that was basically invaded by outsiders, you know, all the Americas. And they sort of, it was forever the promise of growth, the promise of here we have everything, etc., food, trees, water. That sort of hovers over the Americas, I think. So they fall for, you know, something that is just not true. You know, they really believe that everything is fine. And you stand back, these are grown men and women. They are people who went to university also. And so it is a kind of falling into politics. This really moves into the realm of politics, a politics that I consider a negative politics. You just don't see that in other parts of the world as strongly as you see it in the Americas. You see it in the United States. I mean, Canada is a bit different. And you see it in South America. But it's a willful form of thinking that you know what is happening and you know. And I don't understand it. To me, it is a kind of, it's a kind of fascism almost, you know? You just want to believe in it. And that is a problem. I think we have to really confront the fact that many people think that they can keep on burning up wood, you know, in the Amazon, and that is fine. The fact that half of the world depends on the Amazon existing in order to exist is something that they simply cannot take it in. I don't know where that comes from, but it is weird. I find that very weird. It's a willful, you know what I mean by the term willful, right? Willful is that you want to believe something that basically you know is not totally true. That, when you see grown-up people, men and women, being that way, I mean, it's just it's a problem. It's unbelievable as a problem, actually. So there is work to be done here, and one cannot give up. That's my message to you. Hear that?
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Sassen. Yeah. So do we have another student question? Do we have another student question? Not until now, but I think, Ursula, you have prepared some important questions for Ms. Sassen as well.
Yes, I like to switch to the daily subject, the corona pandemic. And this pandemic, is dominating the headlines, and many global cities have been affected heavily. Yes. So what do you expect for the future of the global cities?
Right. Well, I mean, the pandemic, as we call it, has actually, it's an interesting event, I would say. Yes, it has killed people. It's a very sad story also. But it also has taught us something about the fragility of our presence in this world, in this, you know, in the sense that we have thought for far too long that we basically could sort of handle anything that is happening on our planet in one way or another with fancy tanks or with fancy forms of knowledge that advance matters, right? And the notion that this invisible, silent virus can affect us in this way, can penetrate us. I mean, we really have to think this through. You know, I invite my students to think this through, what this means. And then, of course, one inevitably thinks, well, isn't that also what we humans have done with Mother Nature? We have also penetrated and destroyed. We have destroyed too much. One very simple-minded line that I use, you know, and it's only partly really the full thing, is that we have destroyed enough zones in our planet that actors like this virus, who used to actually be fine because etc., they are running out of space in the same way that partly because we have destroyed so much. You know, that there is some sort of connection here between this virus entering our lives and the way we have entered our, you know, green zones, so to say. I don't mean the cities per se, but I also mean we're everywhere now. And that one effect is that virus doesn't know where to go. So it is also, because it is also in zones where there are no people, but it is also with us. And these viruses have long existed. But this is the one where we have had the SARS, you know, of the 1980s, was a bit less mobile than this one. This one is everywhere, which tells us that certain elements that we may have initiated in continent A or continent B are now, you know, spreading to a whole range of other. So we have to recognize what is happening. We cannot fool ourselves. That is, I think, the most important issue here.
Thank you, Mrs. Sassen. We have another student's question I'm very lucky to announce. Please go on. Who are you?
Hi, I'm Janek.
Yeah,
I'm studying environmental sciences.
Very good.
And you talked about the housing crisis earlier.
Yes.
About this topic. And I wanted to ask if you would support more radical stances on this, practices like squatting, which are officially, of course, illegal. But what I personally saw are many also empty buildings which could be well used, and then people getting evicted by brutal police force. And I find it kind of paradox that the system evicts those people. And what's your point on such practices?
No, you get an important issue, because what we're seeing is we have actually, as I said already, we have a lot of empty buildings. Not a lot, but we have quite a few empty buildings that could be used, you know, that could be adapted to use by families who are homeless now. We have, in the United States, we have a lot of people, whole families, who are living on the street. This is now a fact. There's simply, and at the same time, we have what used to be big complexes for modest income people. They are now standing empty. And what is happening is they are getting made fancy. There is a major investor who has bought big buildings for modest housing people in 17 countries. You hear that? In 17 countries. Buying up. Why? Because you can upgrade those buildings and get people with higher incomes into those buildings. So why bother with the lower income people, for whom they were often originally built? You follow what I'm saying, right? So I would say, I would urge you to see a film called Push. Push as in push out. I recommend that film to everybody, because that film gets into this story of what is happening with housing. Housing used to be in the hands of sort of modest local entrepreneurs. Now it's in the hands of major international firms. Even housing for modest income families is being grabbed, you know, captured, if you want, by high investment firms. And this is creating a massive crisis. Again, there is a film, really, I recommend it to everybody who's in the room there. It's called Push, as in push out. It's actually at Push. And the housing, the person who was in charge of housing for the United Nations launched an extraordinary effort to understand, to uncover the abuse of the owners of these big buildings where all they wanted was used to be people, and now they don't want people because they can deal with high finance and transform it in something else. So we're really dealing with a very complex moment, and it's a very abusive moment of the average person, and the ones who win are already very powerful actors. They are winning out of this, which is, in other words, three very bad moments in play around the question of housing. And I recommend that film. Have you heard of it, Push?
No?
Not yet, but
Not
we
yet.
will further it on to our students from now on.
Yeah, push as in push out, push like Push, push.
Yeah, thank you. That's great. So then we have a movie as well to watch. And so I think that's a very important thing, because we have that situation in Lüneburg as well with empty houses where people, we have that as well, and where people cannot make a living in because the police will come and get them, even if they would meet there with families and want to get into those houses. So I have another question, and then we'll have a student's question after that. Again, so you mentioned that the idea of having the green city is very important. Trying to have a green city because there is no space left, as you said, no green, healthy space left in the rural areas, or less space left. And how would that fit politically with the fact that to make rents cheap, you have to build a lot of living space. So how would we find a balance between having a green city, making the city a safe space for nature, and still a place where people can live and pay for living?
Well, it's interesting. If you take a city like Manhattan in New York, which is pure cement, building. I'm not talking about the whole bigger city, but just Manhattan, that central part. It is quite interesting to see how even there, where you're working against huge buildings, they are putting plants wherever they can, and that's the park. The people who are in charge of park, and they of course have felt that they have lost so much park that they now are willing to go to very tiny little an edge, a corner, a part of a sidewalk, and plant some plants. And you have children now who want to do that, So it is, I see emerging a minor, this is not a major event, but a minor sort of interest in green, in a little plant, like, you see children, they say a little plant that is sort of half dead, they want to immediately give it water, stuff like that. Now in Manhattan didn't have that. Manhattan was a brutal, tough city, and even there you're seeing it. So, but it's not enough. It's great that we have these new generations who are interested, starting with very little ones. But boy, we need to do some far more radical things. And one point that I didn't mention, but that I'm sure that some people are aware of, is that the chemicals that are involved in the way we build, they're exuding, negative stuff. So we have to change things because it's just not good. And so some experts did images of what is the air around buildings, and it varies quite a bit. We cannot see it with our eyes. It's a certain kind of element that they then give a color to so that you can see it. But it's quite impressive how bad air hovers around a big tower or some other places. So there are a lot of emergent little interventions. that are going to be growing, and that more and more people will willy-nilly become aware of, whether they want it or not. They will become aware of that. And if they have children, they will become interested in contesting that, and criticizing that, because we can build healthy. Germany has been one of the countries that has shown us how you can build with healthy materials, with woods, etc. You know, I remember I was part of a big project in Hamburg, and it was just impressive what the innovations that they have made.
Yeah.
So we can do better, but we will always be destructive in our planet. We cannot avoid being a bit destructive, we humans.
Yeah. So, Mrs. Sassen, we have one last question from a student. Hi, cool that you're there. What's your name? And please ask your question.
Hello, I'm Svenja.
Hi, Svenja.
Thank you. First off, thank you that I can ask this question. I don't know if it's off topic or something, but I heard we can ask any questions about the city and about cities. And I hope I didn't miss it earlier when you talked.
No problem. Go on. It will be fine.
Yes. So I've been to protected cities, like in cities, the parts where the rich people, I forgot the word.
Protected areas is right, I guess.
Gated community?
Gated community.
Okay.
I've been to them in South America, and I've been to them in China. And there are differences in why they are there. I think I understand the families that live there in South America, because it is a safety issue for their children to walk on the street freely. And now I've seen that it changes, and it's also reaching Europe. And I'm asking myself, why is it coming to Europe when we can cross the street safety either way?
Yeah. Well, I think that what we're beginning to understand is that there is quite a bit of differences, that some cities can manage better than others. So we have to keep, on alert. And the best way to put it is that whoever tell them that this is becoming an issue, the way we are, to some extent also the way we're building, especially in the United States. We see that in certain African cities where you build with the wrong materials, that have bad exhaust, etc. But these are all challenges that we confront. And again, we need space, we humans. We need buildings. So we are not angels in this world. We really are not, even if we're very good people and very nice people, and we try to do everything right. When the chips are down, as they say in English, we will still be destroying Mother Nature, bits and pieces of her. So our responsibility is to minimize those destructions, use the right materials, etc., and at the same time to try to minimize the use of certain materials. So, and protect every little plant. Just protect. Give it a drop of water every time you walk out of your house. A little green, but just have green. I am all for that.
Thank you.
There is more to be said about your question, but.
Thank you, Mrs. Sassen. So I think we have one other student question. Is that right? No, that I understood that wrong. Then I think we should close, actually.
Yes, maybe I can ask one question.
One last short question, because we have an incoming call after, actually.
I like your prognosis, And what do you think about Manhattan? You told once that the half of the houses are being empty. Yeah. And now, because of Corona, a lot of citizens are moving to the outskirts. So maybe once Manhattan is a ghost town. Do you think so?
Well, what I think, if we wind up with buildings that are empty, I know a lot of people who have been sleeping on the street, and we should enable them. It should be a rule, an obligation on the part of the municipal government if there are people who are homeless and, you know, reasonable people and older men and women who once had jobs, who want, not drunkards, you know, the drunkards have also long existed. No, I mean people like us who lost at some point, lose everything because everything went so expensive, etc. So we have to make sure that we use uninhabited buildings. And uninhabited buildings in our current period is really a violation of justice. So we cannot allow that. Now, there are empty buildings, and we're not going to succeed in filling those with low-income people because the owners of those buildings will not want it. But at least it has to be an open fight. We want those buildings occupied, rather than saying, oh, well, okay, we can't do that. No. We have to fight. An unused building should be an unacceptable condition in our major cities where you have so many people living on the street. Now, I don't know if you know that in the United States, we have thousands and thousands of people who used to have regular jobs, who used to own cars, now living, you know, on the street, basically. So it is probably an extreme case among the rich countries, so to speak, but there it is.
So thank you. Thank you very much, Mrs. Sassen. It was such an honor to have you here. We really want to say thank you that you made it, that you gave us your time, and thank you for your very important inputs. Our students are going to work on the future of cities during this week, and that was very important for them to hear. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Thank you. It was my pleasure.
Thank you. And I also wanted to thank the 3 students. Your questions were just great, made a really good talk with Mrs. Sassen. Please go on during the next days asking questions, because it's a very rare chance to come into talk with those speakers. So now there's nothing left to say, I think, but thank you very much for watching, and see you tomorrow.
Yes, I want to say thank you very much as well, and yes, enjoy the opening week day. Thank you very much.